an MBA at Clemson University. Okay, since this video won't play for us, we shall. Let's see if I can.
If you can edit the play, I can call someone who might be able to help.
No, I got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're just doing this to make the
We
non-insurers
were going to every Sunday, and the kids just really started to get.
How do you get through your core day? Make it from one place to another, one task to the next. How do you do it?
Stepped away in life, there were people that said that I can't do anything. Said that I couldn't ride a bicycle. There were people that said that I couldn't live on my own, couldn't get a good job and support myself, or I couldn't go to college and graduate. I don't listen too much to people when they tell me I can't do something. There's not a whole lot that's going to stand in my way. There were a lot of people that when I first started at Henry Motorsports, they had no idea what I could do and what I was going to do. I have some guys that are good friends with now, and they told me that when they heard I was coming, and when I first got there, their big thing was, well, what is he going to do?
Heavy Motorsports is the one.
So that's a little bit of Richie Parker's story. Were you guys able to hear? So with Richie's story is one story that often we see happen is that oftentimes, or especially in post-secondary settings, you often hear that teachers want to help, right? Instructors want to help. You have people who are like, okay, we'll bring in somebody with disabilities onto the team, but I don't know how to. So we kind of hear the reoccurring theme here. So the focus of this is looking at the post-secondary level, looking at the college age level. Why? Because it's directly tied with getting gainful employment for science and engineering career fields, typically. Here's another story, another anecdotal story. The main door where everyone would enter, and this is talking about an engineering lab, the main door where everyone would enter through the back was at the top of the 3 stairs. I would not feel safe entering this way, so I used the door, which was actually kept locked, and I had to knock to get in. So imagine that, right? Someone is trying to enter the classroom, the laboratory, the engineering laboratory space, right? The space of learning, right? So they can go on to what's privy, right? Go on to graduate and go on to with their future careers. But having this blocker, this sort of barrier here. So these are stories we kind of hear, and especially researchers kind of bring up. But my story is that I want to show how we can, the research that I did sort of shows how we can bring it more to more empirical data. So going from these anecdotal stories, but now we have the more empirical data. So we'll start with some background, did you know facts. So US adult population, the percentage, anyone know the percentage of US adult population with a disability? So 20%, US adult population, so 20% of the US adult population has a disability. So can you imagine? So 1 out of every 5 individuals have a disability. See how alarming, how large that number is? Now, the most prevalent type of impairment is physical disability. So 13, and that's at 13%. So physical disability, we'll go on to a little definition. in a little bit here, but physical disability, we're looking at difficulty walking, so on and so forth. So that's, in America, that's the most prevalent. Even more so, 7.2% of people with a bachelor's degree in the science and engineering workforce have some type of disability. Now, this statistic right here is not for people with physical impairments, but inclusive of all. There is no, but this is a statistic that the NCS has done. They do not distinguish whether it's physical or non-physical. So that means there's even a much more smaller, all right? There's even much more underrepresentation. So that kind of helps us to lead us to understand that people with disabilities remain underrepresented and underemployed in science and engineering careers. So let's look at the institutions, right? Science and engineering instructors are willing but not prepared to teach students with disabilities. Instructors lack the training to teach students with disabilities as well. As a result, students are tasked with more passive role, something like observe, right? As a teacher is, conducting and people are gaining a handful of experiences in the laboratory, hands-on experiences, students with disabilities often are relegated to just observe. So we're just gonna go over some quick definitions here you might see in the future slides. So if you see SWDP, that just stands for Students with Physical Disabilities, SNE, Science and Engineering. Physical impairment, so that's looking at upper and lower limitations, difficulty walking, for example. Barriers, right? Factors that hinder participation of an event or a situation. And facilitators, which is pretty much the opposite of that, having, propelling forward to be able to participate. So I did a literature review, and some of the key findings helped me to realize some things, right? The literature is not clear on the issues specifically related to students with physical disabilities. More often than not, most were anecdotal from the perspectives of the researchers that were writing at the time. And there was no study that had a cross between barriers and facilitators to students with disabilities, science and engineering laboratories within post-secondary settings or college environments. So this is where my research sort of spun into, is looking at that in that area. So I've gathered perspectives of stakeholders, students with disabilities, to confirm and discover what are the barriers that we're not seeing in the literature, right? Because most of what we were finding were anecdotal. So I created a national survey, and how the survey was sort of broken down was through different domain levels. So we have built environment, so imagine that to be more of ADA, just entering into the door. Then you have technical tasking execution. So that is once you're in the door, once you're in the laboratory space, how are you going to use the tools? You might see some of these symbols to kind of help. And the learning environment, right? The things that are non-physical, non-tangential, not touching. What's going on there? So oftentimes that's the interaction, right? The behind the scenes, the soft skills. There are items in the survey had dichotomous questions, yes or no questions, lighter scale, very few open-ended and multiple choice selections. These were typical questions that were in the survey. So, for example, for the built environment, there were physical barriers to the entrance of the science or engineering laboratory. Check box, yes or no. So that's dichotomous, and you can kind of see some of the questions were asked for the task execution and the learning environment as well. So some of the findings that came out of the survey was that, we wanted to provide empirical evidence, right? We wanted to move away, as mentioned earlier, wanted to move away from anecdotal information, what's going on from the researcher's perspective, and actually get empirical evidence. And we want to identify what the perceived barriers and facilitators were for the students with physical disabilities that they encountered in that science or engineering space. So what we did was a single cross-sectional survey. So sent a survey out nationwide. The incentive was a drawing for $25. The inclusion criteria that was used were they had to be 18 or older, had a physical disability, enrolled in a technical school or college, and had previously taken a science or engineering course. So as far as the recruitment, I've contacted colleges and university deans across the country, randomly selected at least 20 schools from the Carnegie classification system. So looked at research 1 schools, research 2 schools, research 3 schools, so on and so forth. This was all across the US as well, including those that are not within the intercontinental. So you have, I think Puerto Rico was included since we was all randomized and selecting that choice as well. Also contacted were disability service departments, advocacy groups, and science and engineering companies across the country as well, and also online postings on Facebook and other social media. So analyzing this data, we removed any data sorted for unusable data, and it was pretty much descriptive analysis, so frequency counts and percentages, and we look for the prevalence of the barriers and the facilitators. On the qualitative side, since there was some open-ended questions, we also quantified that by counting how many people said similar statements as well. So we quantified those qualitative questionnaires reported. So these were the results from our survey. So we had about 738 people who attempted to fill this for one reason or another. The data sort of got screened out where some people did not did not have a physical impairment, truly reported physical impairment, or did not meet any of the criteria. So that, those type of information was screened to actually completing all areas of the survey. So those who actually completed all areas of the survey were actually analyzed for a total just over 100 respondents from across the country. A little bit more background on the respondents. Most, as you can see here, were female. Most you can see here, ethnicity, race-wise, is white, non-Hispanic, and are currently in school. So that was a huge thing where, we sent the survey, across the country for whomever have taken a science and engineering course in the past, and a pretty good number said that they were still in school. As you can see, these numbers, they are within graduating. They're planning to graduate within the past 4 years. So this is real-time information, so to speak, where we're gathering people who are not from answering a lot of the questions from before the ADA or anything before that. Not even before the 2000s, you can really see, but most have, the bulk of it have been more recent times. Now the physical type of impairments that were reported, you can see here that the most that were reported were sitting, kneeling, squatting, or bending. So that was, and had the most prevalent that you can see here from all the respondents who reported. This is a map showing all the different places that were represented and where they kind of filled it out. So we can pretty much see different spots in different places. The purpose of this is to show you that not everyone filled it from where I was at, the University of Pittsburgh, right? You would think the most would be there, but actually not, right? Most were more on this end, right? Well, past Ohio and sort of more on the western side than on the east. And here we can see some of the results. some of the results we can see from this is that when it came to accessing or going into the building, that was still an issue. So we're not even talking about the laboratories. We're not even talking about, how to use machinery or the equipment inside the laboratory space. No, it's actually just coming in the door from the outside. And we would have thought that all of that would have been resolved since the ADA back in 1990, but not so much, right? So we still see, even today, right, this is, as you saw in the previous 2 slides, that a bulk of the individuals who filled out the survey were talking about something more recent than not. When it came to entering the space, here are some of the areas where they found to be barriers. So having stairs or steps was a large one, as well as operating lifts. So based on our findings, just for the built environment findings, that barriers still remain getting in the door post the ADA. A large number had to do with signage, right? Where can I access, where can I go to find the accessible route to get into the building space? Another one is doors, so operating the doors was another large barrier as well. When it came to inside the space, there was a lot who mentioned about having unclear paths or aisles to getting to a certain part of the laboratory space as well. Now, for additional findings, we're looking at the facilitators instead of the barriers. One of the facilitators were elevators. So many people found elevators to be very helpful when entering the laboratory space. Using ramps and curb cuts were helpful. Once inside the laboratory space, we found that the having cleared aisles, so when instructors or whomever oriented the laboratory had made sure that the aisles were clear to use, it would help them. And what was actually surprising was that you would think that having height adjustable tables were easy, right? Having height adjustable tables, but more people found that it was not easy to use. Height adjustable tables were not easy to use. Now, when it comes to executing tasks within the laboratory space, we found that full participation was limited to passive roles. At least half of our respondents said that they were limited to some passive role, that whether it's note-taking or simply just observing. And this graph kind of shows you, sort of a little gray, but kind of show you how what they responded to in terms of how they were limited when it came to actually using the laboratory. Barriers inside the laboratory were setting up, so getting the lab set up was an issue. Equipment were not being modified. When it came to tools, there was issues with handling, slippery material, gripping, and using tools and materials. Now, this helps us to realize how we can sort of move forward, since a lot of the information, as I mentioned before, were anecdotal, so we can use this as research data to move forward with. When it came to facilitators within the lab space, we found that a lot of people reported that instructions were helpful. So having the course instructions and information that were given to them provided by the instructor or the TA, teaching assistant in the laboratory, were helpful. Non-adapted technology was helpful. So having a digital recorder or a dictation program was helpful. Actually, the reviewer mentioned that adaptive technology. So when you're in the laboratory space, adapting what is already there reported to have to be a facilitator, but still it is seen as a facilitator. And on this right side, we kind of see where people kind of wrote in their answers, and that's where we can kind of see how that kind of information came about. Now, talking about we're gone from having the barriers and facilitators within the outside, going into the actual laboratory space, when actually now the learning environment. So barriers here is that students with disabilities or physical disabilities perceive to simply observe, right? They were given the task to simply observe, and I just remembered a story that that was shared with me where actually one of graduate students that I had with me was just done just that, right? So going into the laboratory space, and the teacher just looked at the student and said, okay, you know what, I don't think you can do this, so I will let you, continue on with this course, and you'll pass the class. We'll just simply watch. And how much is that taken away from the students' actually full immersive experience when actually doing the course? So you can see this across the country, kind of similar type of sentiment there. And for facilitators, we have having group members. So that was interesting for me to see, is that when it came to dealing with peers or work groups or working relationships or working in teams, that was very helpful for them, as opposed more than working, getting help from instructor, so on and so forth. So here for a conclusion, we're just looking at the perceived barriers, which are there still barriers remain in entering the laboratory space. We still have passive roles that limit participation, such as observing. And some of the facilitators, elevators, ramps, and curb cuts, as well as non-adaptive technology we're also seeing as helpful. So with that, we're just to offer some recommendations for instructors and laboratory assistants are to avoid obstructive pathways once inside the laboratory space and engage with students, right? We've heard that to be a current theme. I've heard from various speakers here to encourage and ensure that the students are engaged, right? Asking them. And having support, group-based type learning, encouraging that as well. As for programs and university administration, one of the things that was prevalent was that this actually came from one or actually more than one of the students, was that they got department support by having a hands-on laboratory assistant. So for the things that they weren't able to do, or they didn't feel as comfortable to do, the department hired hands-on laboratory assistant for them. As one participant noted, the department hired someone to be my hands and do the physical tasks that I could not. So just wanted to leave that in terms of some of the recommendations that came out of this research. Now, we've had, there was a lot more information, but I have some research papers that are out there that definitely goes into a lot more of the barriers and facilitators. So this is the end, right? This is where we want to see. We want to have not only an inclusive environment, but and allow people with physical disabilities to be fully participate and where they believe they can help, right? It's not for an instructor or someone else to make that judgment call for them, but to have that relationship, to entertain questions, to find out how could this be a beneficial experience so that they can graduate with the experience needed. So when they go to these job interviews to work for these large Fortune 500 companies, they can share what are their experiences and how they're able to work in those environments. So this is where we're trying to get to, and where we want to go to have a thriving future and to fulfill the engineering talent pipeline. So that being said, any questions? Yes.
Me, hi. I know that some years ago, Purdue University developed a whole accessible lab, and I wondered if you knew what happened to that. Is that a model for other schools? It was completely accessible. It was developed by a guy in a wheelchair.
Bradley Durstock?
Thank you, yes. And I wonder, can that lab be replicated, or what happened to that model?
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't had a conversation with Dr. Durstock. I did see that lab in research papers, right? So you have this. So what he developed is a wet lab, and you can kind of have a simulated environment. I think he started off with having a simulated environment where you can be a first person in that simulation from different perspectives. So whether seated in a wheelchair or standing up, and being able to do the wet lab, which is non-electronic laboratories type of work. Now, I don't know how far. I just remember seeing the research papers that kind of talked about that it's coming. So I don't know, to be honest, how far.
I did see it, and it's very elegant. And then he had a 5-year grant, and it ended, and the program ended. And he went on to develop his own company and do some other things. But I just, I think, how does a student get a job if they can't do the hands-on work in the lab? I always wanted to dissect a frog, I never could. I still want to. But what happens when a student goes for employment and has the knowledge and the mindset, but cannot do the actual work?
Good question. Good question. I heard some people were chiming in while you were saying some of those statements. Does it resonate? Some of the things that she was saying resonated with some, and some testimony. Now, so that's interesting. I know. Was that a question, or you wanted to respond to that?
No, I have one.
Okay. So looking at that, that's something that I was trying to entertain too. Is try to see what could be done at the right now, right? So my first look was to go and connect with the ADA to find out, can we work together on a science and engineering checklist, maybe, because there's a ADA checklist that they have for just building and different, or even, I think there's even one for recreational, but one specifically for science and engineering. Now, I haven't come across the right people, I would say, because I started to go through one trajectory, but haven't heard the response or any responses in that area. So that's something that I'm still trying to see, right, is how do we get this information out there, right, into the hands of our program administrators between colleges and universities, and even companies as well. How do we do that? And it's starts off by building the awareness. So how do we get them to be more aware of what's going on, right? We've heard in in Richie Parker's situation where his manager or other people that he was, some of his coworkers were like, okay, great, you know, looks great, he has the mind, he can do it, but now that he's here, what is he gonna do? You know, I can't see it, I can't envision it, right? It's something that we have to build awareness around. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
So my question is kind of built around, have you done much work yet with OSHA? Because they have certain guidelines for laboratories for health and safety.
Okay.
So that's the Office of Health and Safety Administration that requires certain minimum setups for laboratory situations. So I'm not sure if you've had any engagement with them, but that's someone that you have to work in alignment with. So for example, when I worked in a lab, we worked with a lot of volatile chemicals, and some of them were very heavy, like the 200 proof ethanol, which is not something that was readily accessible, but we had to have it that way for OSHA regulation. So I'm just wondering how much research that you've either done or seen that talks about how do you do these accommodation needs within the set of regulations that already exist for other purposes.
Got it. Right. I haven't. That's something I need to explore a little bit more. I know I've touched OSHA a little bit, but not to the extent where I've done as much work as trying to get going with ADA. So that's something definitely worth looking into. Thank you for sharing. Somebody had to.
From the data that you collected from different universities based on the survey, did any particular university stood out in terms of having better reviews from the students, or was everything across the board similar in terms of satisfaction?
That's the data's there. I haven't looked at that part of the data. I was trying to make sure that I look at what is answering that the question is what is the barriers and what are the facilitators across the board. Trying to move away from the anecdotal, you know, perceived or one-off, you know, stories to actually aggregate information. But that's good, right? To see which university is more.
Stood out as doing a better job.
Yeah. That's true. That's something to look at. I saw.
I was just gonna kind of sort of, I don't know what it's like on the college or the other levels, but in high school, there's not a lot of like physical actually dissecting of animals because of all rules and things. But anyway, I'm an inclusion specialist, so I go into the regular classroom, the kids who are included, not only the kids who are on IEPs, but if they can't do a certain skill, that's my job. They've got the knowledge and they know exactly what to do, so they verbally tell me, you know, what they need to do, because a lot of things are virtual reality. It was dissecting a frog and those kinds of things. So that's what I do as an inclusion specialist when I'm outside of the resource room. So I don't know, just to have someone there and you telling them some kind of, you know, I don't know what technology is used, but I know that they tell me and then I do exactly what they tell me to do, and then the teacher of record, you know, evaluates them. I don't know if that kind of like answers your question, or to assist the person who is not able to perform that task. And I think that you mentioned that in your survey that they said having someone to do
Be the hands.
do the hands-on kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So I can answer that from the college level. Yes, we would provide the hands. The question I heard from over here though was, what about getting a job? And that's where we have to make employers aware. And in Ohio, we have OOD, Opportunity for Ohioans with Disabilities, are working closer and closer now with employers and with people with disabilities to make those connects. So it's teaching them what is needed and then teaching employers what is needed and acceptable too. So I think that's somewhere in Ohio how we can look at that and how we should be forwarding that awareness. But I also had a question because I got stuck way back in the beginning.
Okay.
Height adjustment on the tables, that was not easy. Did you get any reason of why that was not easy?
No one stated.
And I'm looking to buy equipment, and that's why I'm asking.
I can tell you, at least in our labs, the height adjustment has to be done by the people that facilitate the labs before the students come in. You can't just simply come into a classroom and move a table up or down. It has to be done with tools, and it has to be done before the lab is set up. So I would think that would be the reason why.
So there are several different kinds of tables. There are different ways to adjust. There's some that are hydraulic, there are some that are crank,
Yeah.
there are some that are,
And I know, at least for our lab spaces, at least here, the lab tables that do adjust manually through using tools, moving like bolts
Yeah,
on legs,
yeah, okay.
moving them up and down. And
okay,
then
so I see what you're saying, yeah.
And
Thank
then
you.
just to chime in on that, so depending on what kind of equipment is being used for the experiment, it can be extremely sensitive, and rebalancing it can take hours.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
just can't do a lot of adjustment in real time on something.
Optical equipment, things like that, it would have to be set and not moved.
Makes sense.
Not breathed on.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You had back?
Yeah. When I was a graduate teaching assistant, and this is more than a few years ago now, I had a student that managed to injure his hand, and he came in a full cast on his hand. All of a sudden, he's expected to do wet chemistry. I had to step in as the instructor and actually help him do the tasks. You know, this was kind of one of those things that trying to get help into the classroom for the student would have just been too bureaucratic. Just trying to get the request through, it would have taken 2 weeks just to get somebody there, and the kid needed somebody that day. You know, and I didn't have a problem with that. The rest of the students, up until that point, thought I was too tough on them, but when they saw me step in to actually give a hand when somebody truly needed the help, to actually teach, it changed their attitude towards me as well. You've got to be, you know, with science, you've got to just do it. You know, you can't just pass somebody through by letting them skate, because there's no room for making a mistake when you're dealing with decisions that are millions, if not billions of dollars in consequence, you know, on an engineering or a science issue. You got to get it right the first time. But in this, also getting to the tables, many of those height adjustable tables, even if they're not mechanical, let's say there's a switch or there's a lever or something that you can use, it usually takes somebody with a fair amount of dexterity and strength to move those. And having somebody in a wheelchair try to adjust a height adjustable table may not be an option. And this is part of the problems, and many of these devices are designed by somebody who's totally functional,
Not the end.
and they don't think about the consequence of somebody who might not have the leg strength to move this device.
Good perspective.
That's a side business for you too. But your research is to design that stuff. I was wondering if, since you worked with universities to get access to your participants, did any of those universities express much interest in getting the results and acting on your results?
So, well, I was few. I think the ones that were more expressive about being inclined to help sort of saw the need and resonated some way, shape, or form. It was like, I want to see the results. I want to see the results. But that was very, very few in number. I was contacting, college engineering deans to college presidents to, pretty much for these different institutions. And you would get a lot of toss around. So, for example, if I contacted the college engineering dean of let's say OSU, since we're here on this campus, like, oh, go and speak to our disability services, you know. But then again, I had to go and reply to them and say, hey, not every student who have some type of impairment goes to, I don't know how you call it here, DSR or?
ODS.
ODS? Okay. Not all students go to ODS, right? So they found their own way of doing things. So that was a challenge. But if we take it to, you know, some type of organization that can serve as a platform to level the playing field a little bit, like the ADA or some other, I think that will help draw the attention a little bit more. Yeah.
What is your biggest takeaway from the study?
The biggest takeaway is that there's still work to do. There's still work to do. Really, what it was trying to draw is that from this research is to move away from anecdotal to actually have more factual data that people can say, okay, science has been done on this work. So now we can use that as a foundation for creating the technologies and addressing the concerns. So I think we have information now to help go to and maybe change some policies and to work and do stuff with the policies. So there's still work to do. As you saw in the research, right? Who would have thought that we still have issues just getting into the door, right? 1990 was when the bill was signed, and this is 2019. When this was done, you know, people were taking this around the 2017 timeframe, and it's still an issue 20 years later, 20 plus years later. So you had a question in the back.
I was wondering if either in your initial literature review or in your data, did you see any interesting takeaways from particular disciplines as opposed to sort of science labs as a whole, or were there particular, I don't know if you...
Like mechanical engineering versus chemistry?
Yeah.
I didn't look for those across. I think the research can be done to take it that far too, using the existing data to do some type of secondary analysis, just like looking at the universities too to see which one was the best. I think we can use this data can now be used to do that type of secondary analysis, but I haven't taken it that far.
Thank you.
Yes.
How did you identify your survey participants that didn't go through like the ADA or ODS offices that would have just kind of maybe fallen in and just attended the classes?
So I tried my best. So what it looks like here is that most of the respondents were still at university setting, and I was trying my best to get people who were working in fields, so in engineering and industry fields. So I contacted Boeing and other companies and said, hey, can you send this across your companies and you know, get this distributed. The other avenues that I used was the advocacy groups or advocacy programs. I'm drawing a blank into the biggest ones in my mind, but USBLN and other organizations that some of these students might identify, or non-students, right? People who filled out the survey, some of the participants might identify with, that may fall into that role, please. Oh, my time is over? Oh, sorry. Last question in the back.
Have you considered looking at other disabilities, not just physical? Because I understand physical disability is visible and it's easier to pursue policies because you can see it. Have you considered looking at other kinds of disabilities?
Yes.
That could be heavy barriers.
One of the reasons why we took physical disabilities is because it was seen as most prevalent. Although I was trying to determine how can I do others, right? Cognitive disabilities, so on and so forth. But just focusing on one type of grouping of disability, then we can then continue to do other types. So that's why I didn't, I guess, do other different types of disabilities.
Actually, cognitive disability is much more numerous in the United States than physical disability.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Cognitive disability is much bigger than physical disability if you look at the demographic in the United States.
So this was the statistics I got was from the NCS, which is National Center of, I forgot the rest of that acronym, but they were mentioning that, I think on the charts they actually had physical to be more. I could take a relook at that, but I was.
Yeah, I'm relying on census data and the analysis that we did in terms of disability and employment, and cognitive disability was prevalent.
It was more prevalent?
Yeah. And sensory, for example, issues that autistic adults have to have certain accommodations that might be not related to accommodation for students with physical disabilities.
Noted.
Could be that your population is the one that is studying engineering.
Yeah. What was that?
Your population is the one that is studying engineering, so
Right.
maybe in the engineering population, the physical disabilities could be like higher.
So definitely, I know my time is up, but I just want to thank everyone for joining in, and any questions, I'll still linger around a little bit for that, so thank you all.